So good. Okay, so let's continue with Unit 1. The first lecture, we were moving very quickly and talking about three components. Once we were talking about our hosting mechanism, which is S3, our static storage service. And what we were doing is we were using S3 in order to produce HTTP, Hypertext Transport Protocol, and HTTPS. That is very fundamental to me because in order to do web development, you have to provide HTTP as a service to others. HTTP is just a way for text to get moved over the internet, and for requests by others to get serviced, you need endpoints and you need things to be in an expected place. You need to have a bit of DNS to support that request and reply protocol. You need to have an IP address somewhere that is in a reliable place. The IP can change so long as some DNS knows about it. You all are working with a relatively fixed IP address, but URLs in your first example were very important. Naturally, you need a URL if you want to find an HTTP endpoint where traffic can make a request and then get a reply. That to me is a very good foundational principle, because if you know where something is on the internet, you can begin the process of securing that thing and saying that, well, valid requests are going to come from this place. And so that begins our process of talking about security, which will follow up with what we call an Oauth provider, OAuth provider. Oauth is an open source protocol that you all can make your own Oauth security service. That would be a fun senior project. Right now we need a quick Oauth service that's on demand and that works very quickly. Facebook has volunteered early in its career to become the de facto third-party authentication for the internet. They're the ones who supply Oauth. And what that's done is they've very ingeniously positioned themselves as somewhat of the center of the internet for certain internet users. Certainly, this may not be you, but when people first begin using their smartphone or they begin to first use their laptop, Facebook is probably among the first 5 locations that they begin to fool around with, because frankly, all their friends are on it. Now, as of the time of this lecture, Facebook is under unprecedented negative publicity. They're under a new negative stock pressure. There are people on various large shareholders and pension funds want for the CEO and founder of Facebook to step aside. This is unprecedented. This is a company that's moved in an almost unlimited way since their IPO. Hence, we're using Facebook. Facebook offers Oauth is authentication. And what it means is that instead of you guys making your own username and password confirmation mechanism, you're instead allowing Facebook to supply the authentication. Now, what's interesting is that people aren't necessarily making an initial username and a password on your site. What they're doing is they're saying, hey, if you'll accept my authenticated status to Facebook, then I'll just use your site, if you'll accept that. And you guys are saying, yes, don't make an initial password to our site. We'll just take your authentication from Facebook, and then we'll let you use our site after you've authenticated to Facebook. What this does is it creates an onboarding ramp to your website. That means that so long as you're already authenticated to Facebook, you can quickly make an account on our website based on the Oauth protocol. Okay, so Oauth is a very good system that Facebook is volunteering to use. Now, interestingly, there's a lot of interrelationship between Facebook and Google, largely because Google is kind of the first great web company of the 21st century. They incorporated and became very successful 2000, 2001. And a lot of the early alumni from Google have gone on to make interesting careers in Twitter, Facebook, Yahoo, and across the great Silicon Valley companies. In many ways, Google was a resurgence of Silicon Valley, and it was a competitive offering to what was then Microsoft, which was the greatest brand, not just in tech, but in all of business. And so Google made a very interesting dent in the Microsoft presence, and I think has gone on to surpass Microsoft in terms of its visibility. I mean, it's very rare that we consider Microsoft among the giants of tech any longer, even though they're incredibly important. They're foundational to what we do. Now, the only reason why I invoke Google is because a lot of the Google people helped to found the resurgent, the new Facebook. And so a lot of the attitudes that were perfected at Google percolated out to Facebook. So a lot of the Facebook people were saying, well, how do we be a fixture of the internet? How do we create an internet that uses Facebook as a tentpole? How does Facebook become one of the foundational presences on the internet? And so their authentication program is obviously one of these great ways to make Facebook one of the cornerstones of the internet. So Google offers some very foundational components. They offer a lot of open source projects. They offer DNS. They offer a lot of foundational services to the rest of the internet. And Facebook wants to offer its authentication as a foundational presence to the rest of the internet. So I accept student criticisms about the very presence of Facebook in our class. I mean, we're a security school. We teach a lot of security here. It is clear that students have viable concerns related to Facebook. They have in the past, and it wouldn't surprise me that they still have them, especially in light of the recent news. Let me say that the recent controversy surrounding Facebook is not a new controversy. Facebook is fundamentally involved in selling your data to the rest, to whoever will volunteer to buy it. The Obama presidency was fundamentally a massive customer of Facebook and for your data. And the most recent presidential election required massive purchasing of user data from Facebook. So I don't see why we're suddenly visiting the controversy right now. We are certainly bringing up old grievances, but they're relevant grievances, and they're going to hurt Facebook now as they did in the past. Does that make sense? When you're as big as Facebook, you face what I call the Nickelback problem, which is there's this rock band called Nickelback, and they became very popular. The moment they became very popular, they lost their coolness, and it's the moment that people began to make fun of them. Does that make sense? So if you're going to be big like Facebook, you're going to have to contend with having a heavier crown on your head. So Facebook is a very important part of this course. I don't know how to take the Facebook part out. If I were to say, okay, forget Facebook, we protest, we're not using Facebook anymore as our authentication, I don't know what we would use in its place. For example, Google Plus also has an OpenAuth. Amazon also has an OpenAuth. Amazon is bigger than it used to be. Does that make sense? But, the president at the time of this video is also picking bones with Amazon. Amazon owns the Washington Post, which is very contrary to the president, is constantly criticizing the president. So I'm afraid even if we were to use Google Plus as an authentication mechanism, somebody here would find an issue with it. If we were to use Amazon's login as an authentication mechanism, one of our bright students would find an issue with it. So we're going to use Facebook now. We've done it in the past. We're going to do it so in the future. And I would say this, and I would say that if you're watching this video, you are probably an exceptional student. And if you go forward with the skills in this video and other videos, you will have an exceptional adulthood. You will be a developer. And let me propose that there are many people out there who are not as exceptional as you, not as informed, not as talented, certainly don't have the attention span to even get into the 5th minute of this video. That means that you live a different life. Your brain is different than so many people around the world. And let me say this, while you are debating whether Facebook is a legitimate service on the internet, there are people out there who are not considering that at all. There are people who are saying, look, I started using an Android phone last year, and I use 4 apps. I use Facebook, I use Twitter. Does that make sense? And the person is learning things about the internet. That's probably not you. You are probably more informed. But because most of the population uses Facebook, that creates an advantage for you because you use a service that they use. And then if they make an authentication within Facebook, they're going to quickly begin to use your service. So Facebook's an important piece of that. IAM is going to be inside of the same cloud as your S3. IAM is Amazon's identity and access management. What it does is it creates roles that people can assume when they get into our service. I created a quick role in our first class. I'm going to do it again today. We're going to go over it. But you see this interesting pyramid, this triad or this triangle that's forming right now that has your HTTP service that provides data. Now, it can either be secure or insecure. If you want to go forward with security, you're going to add a layer of authentication, which requires a username and a password to do an initial check that that person is who they say they are. And it also creates a human layer where a person needs to authenticate to your system. That also makes an agreement with Facebook that, hey, Facebook, if a person says who they say they are on Facebook, we're going to accept that for initial data access. Does that make sense? So it creates a quick authentication for you on the second week of class. So you guys and girls are accomplishing more, right, by doing that. Now in the future, you may decide to not have Facebook as an authentication. You're going to have that latitude. Right now, you guys have hosting and authentication within 6 hours of attending our class. That's good. It's moving you fast to getting something going. Okay. Now, IAM is what is the handshake that you make with your authentication provider that says, hi. And Joel is a good guy for allowing us to borrow. He will never become known to the internet community. He's just an individual known as Joel. And we may delete that and obscure his identity. But there's an individual, a fictitious identity person by the name of Joel, and we made a Joel role. And inside that role, we have a trust relationship with this Facebook app. You see the identity of that app is the same here. And we can determine that that is an app on Facebook that we will respect. So if we get a username and password that works on Facebook for this app ID, then we will accept that for initial utility here. Now let me produce a little use case that I want you guys to think about. Let's say, just think about this. Let's say you have a website and before a person can log in, they actually need to create a username and a password. That's an interesting moment because they actually have to create a secure association with your website before they offer a username and a password. And you're kind of thinking, where does the initial security relationship take place before somebody has a username and a password? Does that make sense? Like there has to be a moment where you operate with confidentiality with a website. And so what Facebook is actually doing is it's giving you the ability to create an initial username and a password with your site. Because you'll say, okay, I accept that you are who you say you are because you're authenticated through Facebook. Now you can create a username and a password with us. And that's how you will be known in the future. So what Facebook is doing is it's not operating, taking your data while you're on the site. What it's doing is it's creating a moment where you can create an initial security association with your website. And that'll happen in a week or so. So you can create a username and password. And then in the future, you can offer that username and password that Facebook doesn't know about, and that creates a secure association just with your website. And that's of interest to us. And so if you're feeling negative about Facebook, I respect your feelings. You're cool. Like you're good in my book. You're no problems here. But what I'm doing is I want to get you off of using Facebook and create a username and a password with your own site. But I've got to use a little bit of security before I get that done. Does that make sense? So yes, we're leveraging Facebook. That will create acceptance on behalf of your users, but then it will create security ultimately between your users and yourself. So that's, it won't be so bad. Now I sense that many of you are kind of like, yeah, whatever, Facebook. I've heard of it. So what? I appreciate that. But I just want to explain fully what we're doing. Now, IAM is about roles. You see this ARN right here? What we're going to do is we're going to embed that role inside of our HTML, and it will allow us to create a secure association with Facebook when they use your page. And then we're going to attach policies, of which there's about 300 that are pre-built. We're actually going to choose a policy that we've built before, and we're going to attach that. And that policy is involved with creating access to your bucket. Does that make sense? So we're creating a very secure handshake between your Amazon resources and your Facebook security partner. And so what you're doing is before you start to send and receive data from the site, you're creating security very early in your development process so that security is baked in to your product, which is an ethic that I'd like to pass along to you all. Some people are trying to secure their sites later. That's unlikely. It's probably better for them to start fresh than try to, put some band-aids over something that's already quite corrupt. That's my thoughts on that. So your roles are is an identity that people assume that have many permissions that come with it. So you can see the Joel policy right there, the fictitious Joel who doesn't exist, right? He has a policy that allows for stuff to go to the bucket. And so I just want to go through this process. I'm going to show you how to set it up. And then in the next video, we're actually going to apply it to some code and debug and get your photos uploaded in a secure way. So let me see a show of hands of people who have an Amazon S3 bucket. Who's got a bucket? Good for you. Most likely your bucket has a public URL, and those public URLs are associated with the pages that you've put in there. You technically need pages to be there before it will respond to website queries. Most likely you have enough experience at this point that S3 is something that you're familiar with. To me, the most important concepts for S3 are URLs and the HTTP/HTTPS protocol. Those are two things that S3 provides, and they're very efficient in doing so. Probably the third component is uploading HTML to that, and that's all you really need to know. There are a lot of permissions that go along with it, and there are properties that can be set. Probably the most vibrant of which is the static website hosting, which means that you all can create websites in very little time. Let me say this. For you to walk into a large and viable corporation like an Exxon or a Goldman Sachs or a Nintendo or a Sony or many of the other hundreds of organizations that come to recruit here, for you to walk in on the first day and be able to stand up a website in a few minutes is a singular talent. It normally takes a lot of skill and a lot of time and expenditure to create a Linux, Apache, or light TDPD website. I respect all of those skills. I've had to do all those. But what matters? Getting something done or doing something a certain way? Well, frankly, things just need to be done. They need to be done correctly. They need to be done securely. So long as those can be met, you will receive applause by wherever you are working. Does that make sense? So having these rather progressive skills means that you are a more productive person on the first day. Does that make sense? It's kind of my obligation to kind of equip you with those things. So S3 is something you probably already have. Now, what I want to bring your attention to is you need to be able to get the URL from things inside of your bucket in order to configure security across Facebook and then ultimately across IAM. And let me show you how that works. Now, put your hand up if you're familiar with getting the URL from things inside of your S3. Put your hand up if that sounds familiar to you. Yeah, that's wonderful. That's because you worked hard in your first week getting acquainted, and now no problem. Like you understand that idea. So that's an important skill. So what I want to do is I want to go into Facebook, and you probably remember how I made apps. So I'm going to just create a new app, and I'm going to incorporate that into what we're doing here. So let's create a new app. Now let's say this is my sample Joel number 2. And I realize I just create way too many apps, but that's okay. I'm going to create the app ID, and this is going to be when you think about it, having that app ID is a really big deal when it comes around to IAM, because the only way that I can create security between my S3 is to create a Facebook app that supplies authentication, and then for my IAM to have that ID later. So if you think about it, that app ID that I just generated is money in the bank. That's a big first goal, and you get that just by starting. Now, check it out. There's so many things that Facebook has for you. You can make Instagram integration. You can do payments. You can make games or do marketing, where you're data mining. The stuff they're complaining about, like, oh, the presidential campaign had access to Facebook user data. Yeah, it's called Marketing API. It's been there a while. Nothing new about it. There are a lot of funny businesses on the web that also get Facebook data. A lot of fictitious pharmaceuticals that do nothing, that are marketed across Facebook every day. A lot of fictitious cryptocurrency businesses had dependency on Facebook. Okay, so there are plenty of people who use the Marketing API. Webhooks help you a lot. Audience Network, Account Kit, Analytics. These are all very good things that Facebook offers. We like Facebook Login for this class, so we're gonna grab the Facebook Login. Let's get started. Now, the next step probably will make a lot of sense to you. Are you making an iOS app? Negative. Are you making an Android app? Negative. Are you making a website? Yes. Okay. Now, what's the URL of your site? Well, let me go into S3, and let's say today I'm going to make this query core page the page that Facebook needs to know about. Now, let me just offer a little note here. The URL that you want to give to Facebook is going to be the page where there's a login button that is going to log into Facebook for the first time. Okay, so we're going to put that button, and Facebook only gets one URL to know about you, and that needs to be the page where your login button is. So that is going to be this page called Query Core. We may change the name of it, and so I want to grab that link the same way you did last week, and then I'm going to put that in here, and you can see that this URL is very articulated. It's what we call a fully qualified domain name. It has the HTTP. It has all the subdomains. It has the parental domains, and then it has all the routing, and ultimately the page that we want to make Facebook aware of. We're going to save that and continue. Now, Facebook does a great job of offering code, and you'll see that the code that we use today will leverage this code. And so what I'm going to do here is we've done much of the work in submitting the basic information that is needed. Now, there may be other stuff here, but from what I understand, I have given you all the information that you need to make it work. Namespace and app domains are not needed if you supply this URL correctly. Now, terms of service and privacy policy, these need to be there. You can just give them a provisional terms of service, and you could call this privacy policy. These are some updates. PP, that's fine. These are some updates to the Facebook system. Oh, so that's not going to work. So I'm going to put the query core in there as well, and it checks to see that page is there. That's fine. We are not reviewing apps this time due to changes we are making to the Facebook platform. Yeah, it's called being called in front of Congress. So let's make that live, and we'll put this under any of those will be fine. And that should be ready to run. So that app ID is particularly important to us. So keep that in mind. Let's go click to copy that. And let me say right now, anybody feeling lost, it's okay. This is why we put it up on YouTube. Does that make sense? Let me say that the best thing to do with complex skill sets that have a lot of ideas and a lot of how to is to just review, just repeat. You know, if you get a little bit more every time you repeat, you're doing good. Does that make sense? Understand that it's work that differentiates hard subjects such as this from easier subjects. Not like we have a lot of easy subjects, but you know, our students say that certain subjects are easy than others. I'd probably be inclined to accept that. Now, that app ID, I want to copy that, and then I want to go over to IAM. Now, let's make a new role just to say that we can. And I'm moving quickly here, but what I'm doing is I'm creating a web identity. It means that I'm going to borrow the identity that someone has created on another site, and we're going to use that identity. And we're going to tell Amazon what identity to borrow. So I'm going to say, great, use the identity provider of Facebook, and then use the application ID that we just created, right? And then we'll set up some permissions there. Now, I don't have any policies yet, and I can skip through this, and I can just create the role, which is going to be, which is my new spring role. That's my spring role. Associated with this class, SPR 18. Let's just say that. And we'll create that role. Now, I think what you'll find is you'll have a very small number of roles, and then you'll have a great deal of policies. I think I counted maybe 300 odd policies here. And so you're always going to want to search for your policies, but your roles, you're going to have a small number of roles. Take it from me, you only need one role. If you have 4 or 5 roles, I'm going to say, wow, it's hard to work with your system. I have a lot of other apps and stuff. A lot of these are for mobile. And so these are going to stay. I'm not going to delete them. But, you know, maybe I'll delete a few of them. You know, that's like that was from last term. You know, maybe I'll delete a role. Don't be afraid to delete stuff. You guys in life, you're going to buy a big house at one point. You're going to have a bunch of kids and you're going to be married. And as time goes on, you will accumulate stuff. Being an adult is about buying stuff. That's what you do. You're a big consumer, okay? And what'll happen, you won't be a broke college kid like you are now. Kidding? But you won't be a broke college kid. You'll be this provider, and every week it's going to be about, okay, what do you guys need this week? Let's go to Target and buy the place out. And then you'll come back with your big SUV, or in my case, a Ford F-250 full of stuff, and you'll put it somewhere. And eventually, even if you buy a big house, it will fill up with stuff. And you're going to reach a point when you're like, I have too much stuff. I need to get rid of stuff. And it will be better to have less stuff. And that will happen to you at some point. So I want you to practice now by not having more stuff. More stuff, more complexity. Does that make sense? And that's not some Zen truth. It's just survival. I find that I have a lot of smart students, but their only problem is they have 4 different roles and 20 different policies, and they got 15 different Facebook IDs. And their problem is that they're beginning to mix them up. And here is a smart person who just made a big mess. You're a smart person. Make it simpler to be you. Does that make sense? So Joel role, Jack role, I forget who Jack is. Maybe we'll delete him. Does that make sense? Joel role, we just made that a few minutes ago. But spring role should be our emphasis. So what I have here is I have a trust relationship between this role and this Facebook app. And that's a good place to be right now. Now what will happen is as people log in to your website, they will assume this web identity. Does that make sense? The web identity is an identity that you've approved of on another authentication provider whose credentials you will accept. Does that make sense? So it's like, hey, if you logged in over Facebook, we'll accept that credential. That's good to go here. But that won't apply to everybody, and that app has to be created ahead of time, and then there has to be a security association with your site ahead of time. So there's somewhat of an interesting, very locked down, very airtight affiliation. And anything outside that affiliation will not work. If there's a single letter, right, if your site changes, if your bucket changes, or if your site changes from HTML to HTML, it'll break. It won't continue to work. Every last letter has to be consistent. What if you make a new app? If you have 15 different apps and you're using the wrong app ID, IAM eventually will not allow people to log in as with that web identity. Does that make sense? So whenever I'm looking at students' work, I usually look to see that that trust relationship is consistent, right? And this URL right here, the site URL, is also consistent across here. So that's creating a very interesting security triad where S3 offers some integrity. It's hard to hack S3. It's hard to take it down. IAM creates confidentiality, so only a person who's authorized can get access. And then authorization takes place within Facebook, right? So you have an interesting CIA pyramid, confidentiality, integrity, and authentication or authorization that's taking place right here. So already very much off the bat, you guys are being very professional security providers from the first day. And that's why a lot of security people, you may not be focused on development, but hey, the way that an app is developed, that impacts, that guarantees the security, or it upsets the security of things. So you all can kind of learn about how development works by doing it this way. Great. So now the last thing I want to do is to create some freedoms or some permissions. And so I want to attach a policy. Now, I don't have a policy that's made just yet, so I can't really do that through here. What I want to do is just go into the policy builder, create a policy. Now, the visual editor is a place to go once you've added some JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. We're going to do more with JSON as we go. JSON is the building block, one of the most important building blocks of the internet. HTTP is a building block. JSON is another building block. JSON means that you can write information in a format that can be read across all devices. It can be read on a desktop computer. It can be read on a mobile device. It can be read on a web page. JSON is the most important building block of the internet when it comes to moving data, not just text, but data in a structured format. So JSON is important. It just so happens that we're going to make some JSON here inside of our cloud. So what I want to do is I want to move you to our GitHub very briefly and say, here is our GitHub. And inside of our Unit 1, we actually have a sample IAM configuration policy. Now right here it's hard to read, so I want to go into the raw format, and it will download this file. And it's hard to see here, but it's what I'm going to have you do is I'm just going to have you copy it. Does that make sense? Just go select all or Control A and then copy that whole text, or the way you guys do it, just copy it all. I just like to go Control A, copy, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go and we're going to delete that, and we're going to put in the new stuff. You'll see that it begins with the brackets. JavaScript objects always begin with brackets. And the way that we're going to customize it is we have to customize it in two ways. A, we're going to have to put in our bucket name right here and our bucket name right there. Okay? So what I want to do, my bad, I'm going to highlight that. And I'm going to say, okay, what's the name of my bucket? It's that. So I want to grab that pure, don't try to remember that. That's really ugly. And I'm going to place that there. What that does is it creates, the bucket has its own Amazon resource name. An Amazon resource name is a way of routing requests around Amazon. Amazon is its own little universe of machines and services, and an ARN is an Amazon resource name. And if you give an ARN to Amazon Web Services, it will find the database that you want to talk to, or it will make a notification through the notification service, or it will let you talk to an S3 bucket or an EC2 instance. ARNs are very cool things inside of Amazon. And let me just prove that to you by going, that is the bucket ARN is available by clicking on that, and that's sample starter bucket. So that's going to be put right there. And the ARN is a long piece of text that's hard to remember, and most people don't use ARNs. ARNs are for machines. So a machine can locate another machine, wherever it happens to be. Okay? And what we're going to be doing is when we ultimately upload images, we're going to upload them to a folder that's going to have your Facebook ID on it. And you'll see that very soon. So we're saying, okay, let's talk to that bucket. And the rest you can just kind of let it hang, because website test, that's going to be, these are going to be databases that you're going to work with very soon. Okay, let's review the policy, and it seems to be okay. Now what's cool about this is it's giving me the chance to delete some of these other elements. And I wouldn't mind deleting some of these other privileges. We don't need them right now. But in truth, the S3 piece, none of this will fail because we're not really using it right now. The DynamoDB, those tables don't exist. The SimpleDB, we've deleted that, but the S3 stuff is relevant, and so we'll adjust that later. So I need to create a name, and I'm going to call this the Spring Policy 2018 for Spring Roll IAM role. And I'm moving fast. Hopefully I don't make any mistakes. Let's go create that policy. Now, the reason why I gave it a descriptive name is because it's very easy for us to create a policy and then just to forget what it's called. But in fact, we need to remember what it's called so that we can attach that policy to the role we created. And the reason why I want to be clear about that is that you all are smart, you're good brains, but it'd be very easy even for a smart person to forget what something is called. What did I call that? What do I associate it with? I'm a smart person, I forget. So I need to name something in a descriptive way. Spring policy just got created, so I want to grab spring policy. That's great. So now I've created these policies that I want to use. And I go back to my role. And my new spring role, hey, let's go in there and let's attach that policy that you and I just made. Spring policy. For spring roll. See how important it is to leave some breadcrumbs for yourself? This is the only problem I find that smart young people in your position make, and that they're smart, but it's just hard being you. It's hard having all these things to sort out. So you're sorting it out, but when you have 45 different roles and a billion different policies and 28 Facebook app IDs, it's just human to screw that up. Does that make sense? So keep your plate clean, create one role, one policy, one Facebook app, delete stuff, create one bucket. Does that make sense? Make it mega simple to be you. And delete stuff left and right. And it will be an attitude that will make you successful as a parent. I laugh. You don't find that funny. That's fine. I laugh. So now you have something very important. You have Facebook app ID. You're going to need that for your code in the next video. You also have an IAM role, not a policy, but a role, right? A role that you can use inside of your code. If you have those two things, you can stitch Amazon and Facebook together in a secure way to create a triangle of confidentiality, integrity, authorization, or CIA together, and then you can brag to Grandma, hey, Grandma, you know Facebook. And guess what? Grandma's on Facebook. Grandma knows about Facebook. She probably uses Facebook more than you do. if you say, hey, Grandma, I merged Amazon and Facebook in a program that I'm writing for class, she'll be like, hey, that's pretty cool. Would you like a cookie? You might just earn some baked goods by proving to Grandma how cool you are, okay? So that's what you should focus on right now, is fooling around between these three important services that you have. And in the next video, we'll make some code.